So we're going to go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Lana, and I'm your host for today. Today, I'm joined by Chase Hanson as my co-host. You might recognize him from a podcast from, I think, a few episodes ago. We also have another familiar face. We have Diego Robles, who joined us, I think it was in December for your first podcast. So just as a quick introduction for those of you guys who haven't seen that one yet, Diego Robles is a professor at CSUSB as well as San Diego State University. He's also a high school teacher in the LA Unified School District, as well as a researcher for the Academy of Motion Pictures. So kind of all over the place there. So thanks for joining us. Right before we start, I do have a quick announcement, and we do have an event coming up next week with RAFMA, and it's the Intro to Hieroglyphs workshop. So Miranda is going to be dropping the link in the chat. Cool. So again, thank you guys for joining us. So I guess we'll just go ahead and get started. So today we're going to be talking about time and multiculturalism and kind of how that all relates to art. And so I think, when we start, we should start with the beginning. So I guess the first question I'll sort of start us off with is how do we define art as being from the past? Is it just because the style? Is it, because it was made years ago? Kind of what is art from the past?
Well, first, thank you for inviting me again. And hi, Chase. Good to be with you this time. And good to be with you again, Lana.
Nice to meet you too.
Thank you. And just a hello to Anna and Alice, who I see, and Aaliyah, and to all the other students that may see this later in the recording, and whoever else I never will meet who is seeing this in whatever part of the future you're in. And we're still in this pandemic, and I'm teaching from home, so I'm here on this talk virtually. My daughter just fell down, and she hurt her face a little bit, and she's going to school from home. They're about to go back in hybrid. So whenever you see this, whoever you are, wherever you are in time, that's the moment we're in right now.
Right.
So your question was, why is it important to preserve art from the past?
Yeah.
So I think part of it is like what I just did right now with the introduction and setting up like a hi, a hello, and what's happening in this moment in time for those in the future, whoever will see this. Since this is being recorded, people will see this either in the near future, and could be even farther than the near future. Sometimes on YouTube, I notice when things are uploaded, and it's like 7 days ago, 7 hours ago, 7 months ago, 7 years ago, and I don't see things much farther than like 11 years.
Right.
It's very rare. It's usually people that had special contracts with a YouTube, the company, or Google that have things past 11 years. We're in the year 2021 right now. So whenever you are watching this, who knows what year you're in. You're likely to be in 2021, because the further we go into the future, the less likely people will see something like this. Not to say they won't, but it'll just be smaller percentage. At least that's how statistically things have been rolling out on the internet. And so right now, 11 years ago is 2010. 2010 is like some of the older stuff that most people will see on YouTube play. Again, there's some things older than that, but it's very few people that may have had contracts with these internet companies that are now humongous, that back then were pretty big, but that were not humongous. They were moderate in size. Now they're gigantic, some of the biggest, most powerful companies in the world. And some of that has gotten us into a bit of a problem. But not to go too far into that branch, but part of preserving art from the past, I think, is to have a better grip of the present. So like right now that I'm talking about the the hello, the recording that will be out in the future for somebody seeing this. Um, you know, uh, this isn't an art piece exactly. We're talking and we're recording. Hey, Diego. Um, and this talk that's being recorded, we're giving it context by just talking and talking about what's going on today, establishing the time and space. And an art piece, it doesn't have although sometimes it has a mouth, but if it's a mouth, it's a mouth that is an aesthetic one. But it will speak in the languages of art. It will speak in the visual art language, in the musical art language, in the literary art language, in the media art language. Um, it will speak in that kind of way and talk about, just like I am now, the time and space it's from. And so right now, someone listening to this, watching this, uh, 7 hours from now, is able to see a little bit of what 12:09 p.m. Pacific time was all about, even though maybe they're in the nighttime rather than in the daytime, and maybe they're getting ready to settle down and maybe watch some TV, do some homework before going to bed. But we are here in the middle of the day, kind of closer to the morningish time, just getting going. And same thing for someone watching it 7 days from now, 7 months from now, 7 years from now, or more. They'll find themselves in whatever context they're in. So an art piece, it does speak a time and space. And so to preserve that art piece from the past, we're also preserving that time and space from the past. We're able to preserve that context from the past. Um, that's just kind of on the surface. If we go beneath the surface, I think what's important about that is that we tend to have a short shelf life in terms of how we are experiencing moment and time. And so right now, for example, we've been in this almost year, pretty much year of being in a pandemic in a very serious way. And it's important to preserve what our experiences have been. It's important to preserve art that has been made at this time because it will be a document and it speaks. Maybe not in literal verbal language like I am right now, but it speaks nonetheless. And so if it speaks, people can listen. And if people can listen, people can also engage in, immerse themselves in some of the context of that time and that space. And that's important for many reasons. Um, uh, the first one of which is, like I was saying, conversations disappear, contexts disappear, experiences disappear. We live in a continual reality of disappearance in many things. And some things don't disappear, but unfortunately, things that are in the metaphysical realms tend to disappear. Things that are in the physical realms sometimes tend to remain. And so that actually puts us in quite a bind, because things like how we are treating the earth will remain, and it will take some time to disappear that kind of engagement we've made with it, and in particular the destruction of it. It will take some time to have that kind of destruction disappear. But metaphysically, when we're talking, um, what we say, what I'm saying right now, will disappear very quickly. And even experiences you have, your body and mind go through, will disappear uh, fairly quickly. And those things, those immaterial things that are also important, just like material things, have that uh, uh, difference in terms of disappearing or remaining. In art, we have an interesting and aspect of the materiality and the immateriality, the physical and the metaphysical aspects of the artwork. The physical aspects of the artwork, if they're preserved, will remain, but the uh, immaterial aspects, the metaphysical aspects, that's the context that is a little more difficult to preserve. So if we're able to preserve the artworks, even then it's not guaranteed to preserve the metaphysical parts, the immaterial parts. But at least the physical parts, the material parts can be. I think to preserve the immaterial parts, the metaphysical parts, uh, requires human language, human activity, and community to keep them in circulation discursively and keep them um, engaged in the ever-changing reality that we live in.
Yeah. So that's what kind of interests me is the idea that just preserving isn't necessarily an act of stagnation, isn't necessarily an act of just preserving where you're just grabbing these conversations from the past and freezing them in their context. It also allows us to kind of create this dialectical relationship, this conversational relationship, not just in the present with present contexts or just in the past with past contexts, but between the present and the past, kind of adding this new overall superseding context. Do you think there's any structure of importance there or order of importance? Is anyone mm, more significant than the other between these past contexts, these present contexts, or these conversations between them?
Hmm. Uh, mm, that's a great question. I think, um, well, the present context is decisive. The present context is able to recontextualize possibly some of these past contexts and maybe even theorize or imagine or project future contexts or begin to create them. And so I think the context of the present is the decisive one that could open up those possibilities. Or is it important? That was part of your question. Absolutely. I think that's part of maybe aspects of art history, art criticism, and art theory, and art education, and even art practice. I think that whenever there's a retrospective, whenever there's a return to aesthetic principles, a re-engagement with uh, artists' work from the past or movements from the past, that it could be possible to open up those contexts. Um, I think where it, for me, it starts to get interesting is um, the dark matter, the the dark energy too, that isn't explored even when we look back. In other words, in very practical terms, um, there's an artist that many people hadn't seen her or his work before, and at some point it comes to the spotlight. Maybe this is after that person's death. Maybe their work was turned into a museum by their grandchild, who's now an adult, um, and things are reassessed in terms of what that artist not only did, but how they played a role in the development of art more broadly. Even though their role was never acknowledged or incorporated into a history or canon, uh, maybe their role was in reality existing. So, in other words, artists are engaging usually in communities, either directly or indirectly, usually both. And in other words, they're contributing to an ecosystem that we're all a part of, that is ever changing and ever uh, developing. And so back to the present. So to understand our present context, um, revealing or seeing or rediscovering some of those past contexts, some of those past artists, could, for help illuminate where we are now and why we are the way we are now.
Yeah, definitely. And in my mind, I'm brought back to like the art movements of like the 1900s, for example, and a lot of it was groundbreaking. And like when we look to understand, what was going on, a lot of those isms like Cubism and Impressionism, all those things like that, Surrealism come to mind. Um, in order to understand what those movements were, is we have to look at what happened right before. So like especially with Surrealism, they're breaking away from modernism, that kind of a thing. So I think that brings us back to context and to understand a lot of things from the past, or maybe even where we are today or where we're going. It kind of requires knowing the context of where we were to know, like I said, like where we're going.
And that idea that Diego touched on of memorial dark matter is definitely kind of interesting. If I understand it right, an example would be like if I was to take two photographs of looking down my street at different angles, catch one side of the street, then catch the other side of the street, but I miss like 1 degree of angle in the middle, 1 arc second in the middle, that information is kind of lost for the future. Even though it's in the context of both of these photographs, the future won't exactly know it and preserve it. So, does that mean that information is lost forever, or is some aspect of it still contained in the photographs?
Hmm.
That dark matter is definitely kind of interesting to think about. Um,
I think there is even more than that. Possibly, there could be dark energy, and what that means is like certain kinds of, for example, when I'm looking into the screen right now and I'm talking to you, and you are 4 years into the future, and only you, that person who is listening to us right now, listening to me in particular say these words right now, 4 years into the future in 2025, and how this conversation we're having right now is interesting to you. Not just interesting, actually relevant. Like right now, we're in a pandemic. You in 2025, March 11 at 12:21 p.m. Maybe it's not that time, but it's probably not even that day. Might not even be that month. But you're in 2025. I know some of you watching this are in 2025, and that hasn't happened yet. But you can hear me talking to you. There's some kind of energy happening there, and it's being created right now, but it's like disappearing and then reappearing in your present, those that are in 2025 right now. Why? Well, it was a random number that I just threw out, 2025. But maybe it's not so random to you listening in 2025. Maybe there really is something important about what we're saying in 2021 for you. And what you do with it is part of that energy that isn't explored usually, right? Like when we live, we're usually living in a much more linear, um, present oriented, or even past, but present oriented way. We don't speak to 2025 very often. But right now, in this moment, I'm speaking to you in 2025. See if what we're saying in this talk can be important for you in a way that we have no idea why it would be. But there might be something. Maybe there's an exhibit that just happened at Cal State San Bernardino at the RAFMA, or maybe there's a Pacific Standard Time in art and science happening right around your time, and this is relevant for it also. Maybe it has nothing to do with art. Maybe it has to do with science, or maybe it has something to do with psychology or technology. But there's something that is maybe relevant to you in that time that we're looking at right now, and that we'll continue to look at for the rest of the talk. Now, all the other people listening to this talk, uh, you could also engage in that inquiry. And I'm inviting everyone, but in particular those from 2025. Um, and it's a random thing. But like in art, randomness is just one technique of many that can produce certain kinds of results aesthetically. And so maybe there's something there. If there is, and you know how to, email me from the future, please do. I know you probably won't, but at least you can think about that. I'll probably be around. Find me in 2025 and remind me and let me know why this conversation is relevant.
It's almost like a message in a bottle in a way, like sending it off to sea and waiting someone responds.
Kind of
Oh,
planting a metaphysical seed that might erode away, might not.
right. Um, so I guess I'm gonna kind of switch gears for a little bit. Looking at art from the past, a lot of it was done like in marble, which is like a substantial piece that it's not going to go away anytime soon. Such as like we have stuff from ancient Greece and even before. We have oil paintings that have lasted for 600 years now. So I feel like a lot of art from the past has this essence of being durable to last for the future. Do you think that people creating art today are trying to do the same thing, or do you think art from today is more short-lived in a way that like you have to be in the present to kind of really understand and appreciate and experience the art?
I think it's the latter. Like you said, it's more related to the present. But I don't think that's particular to our age. I think art historically has been made for an audience of the present, for an engagement of the present. Could be near future, like like I said, people who may see this in 7 hours or 7 days or 7 weeks, maybe even 7 months. But when you start to get into the years, it starts to fade, and then decades even less, and centuries even less. And so um, I think art to engage in art more non-linearly is an interesting inquiry that I think historically hasn't been um, really practiced. That would be a very radical way to approach art if they're and a very interesting movement in art if it was to happen.
Yeah, we're talking about an issue with a lot of inherent survivorship bias where we think that only long-lasting things last because those are the only things that last. We don't see all the temporary and ephemeral art that people have created. Um, we if we're trying to be reactionary and kind of say nobody's done this very, very temporary art before, let's do some performance art to go against this standard. It's kind of an artificial standard because that stuff did exist in the past. We just don't know about it. Like we don't think much about theater maybe and productions done before Shakespeare because we have Shakespeare's works in print in front of us, but that doesn't mean there weren't people putting on plays. We just because nothing lasted quite as long as Homer did in the long run doesn't mean that there weren't all sorts of other writings going on alongside Homer.
Right.
Um,
I think that's part of the dark matter. Like there definitely has been a whole lot of artists and art movements and art cultures and art communities across the world in the past that have not been historicized and not have not been canonized. I mean, a lot of the history of art is documented because it's connected to nobility, or it's connected to the rich or the nearly rich, and it or the military or a conquest or a trading and market that has commoditized it. And and that is such a small percentage of what art has been historically, and that's the one that is the great uh, majority of the percentage that we know about and study. um, Now I think, I mean, I don't know, but I would say the majority of art, which is not studied across time and space in the past in different cultures and different eras, because they're not tied to nobility, or they're not tied to the rich or nearly rich, or a conquest or military or anything like that. That other 99.9% probably of art, or at least 99% approximately. I'm just throwing numbers out here, but it's probably extreme like that, because there's so many people who, I mean, art is part of life. So from the beginning of life, we've been making art, and the majority of it has not been uh, documented again. So, but maybe there is something of a new um, development happening in terms of um, the art that was happening that wasn't documented. The great majority of art in the past um, may also have been created for a moment in time, a contemporary space and time and people and engagement. And so that's part of what I was just pointing to, like, and from Lana's question, like to have art that is uh, engaging expression that is uh, ed- attempting to interact with audiences, people, communities that are not just in the present or even near future, but that are somehow uh, maybe far into the future. Or I think, does that happen? It happens by default, of course, but um, intentionally creating art that way may be a completely radical way to do art. Um, and all that other uh, dark matter, that 99% that we don't know about of art, is such a rich place to explore as well. There's so much there from folk cultures, working class cultures, peasant cultures, lower class cultures, that the 90 something percent of the people have been in for thousands and thousands and thousands of years in any country in the world, or not even country, region, or space, or land. That's what most of us have been for a very long time. And the art has happened there, of course, and it just hasn't been documented. So to explore that, I think, is really rich, and it's difficult, of course, because a lot of the preservation that happened of the art that was documented, uh, a lot of that preservation happened because of those resources that the nobility had, or the rich or nearly rich, or the military, or the conquests and things like that. The looting that also happened of other people's art in all of these things, like colonialism, and and um, and so I think the um, it's very it's very inspiring when you see a cave that has been found with all this art from like many years ago. That cave that reveals that art is part of that 99 something percent that is not that hasn't been documented, but suddenly this cave was found. Or in not such an abstract way, more recently, an artist maybe from 50 years ago that was not really shown or exhibited, but suddenly is now, because there's more interest in the content, in the themes, in their styles, in their forms, because of also the people doing the research and preservation. Now there's other resources besides, although this one, the nobility resource, the rich people documenting it and preserving art continues, of course. That's probably still one of the biggest operations happening inside of art. But now there's other ones, other patterns happening, other streams happening. There's people documenting art who are academics or researchers or teachers, or work at community centers, or are in religious communities that aren't having to also tie themselves to nobility and things like that. And so now there's other communities that are able to engage in that preservation, and that'll immediately start to reveal some of that 99.9% of the dark matter from the past, because those people don't have the same interests, don't have the same funders, and they can and they could therefore choose to really hone in on artists or art movements from the past that before have been either ignored intentionally or ignored unintentionally, um, from the powers that be.
Right. So you're talking a lot about how, in the past, um, art was really made for the rich and like the nobles, and like that's what we have now, and like the things that maybe weren't are kind of lost to the dark matter. And today our shift is focusing. Um, our focus is shifting. Sorry, switch that. Our focus is shifting in a way where we're focusing on things other than the main events that are going on in our lives right now. It's more about the things that were hidden before in the dark matter. So do you think we still have, I guess, the same amount of dark matter today, or do you think it's just that some things are coming to light and other things are fading back to dark
Hmm.
Um, I did kind of want to say on that subject of the fact that how much there is variable. What Diego was saying about discovering things and how that affects everything shows that the lenses through which we view things can kind of subtract how much dark matter there is, or even add how much dark matter there is. We maybe part of the reason why we think all the art was done by the nobles is largely because we think all the art was done by the nobles going into it. It's kind of that stereotype of an archaeologist sees a building slightly bigger than the rest on the block and he walks in and goes, "It's a temple." But really, what's the largest building on your block? Probably a corner store. Um, and so a lot of the time we only analyze things that we think of as art as being art. If somebody pulls a potsherd out of the ground and they see it largely undecorated, they don't see it as an art object. They go, this is some peasant's dining plate that they ate on. And they never bothered to look into it deep enough to see that there was actually a little bit of decoration that was scraped off. This was something somebody decorated artistically, despite being kind of a crafts piece. And like as a ceramicist myself, ceramic art for the longest time, hundreds and hundreds of years, wasn't considered a fine art and still isn't considered a fine art universally today. We don't analyze it in that same way. So that kind of adds some artificial dark matter there.
That's really great. And that's a very, I think, art-based way to look at things by adding or subtracting. Is it additive? Is it subtractive? Is it a relief? Is it right? Are we making it more three-dimensional, or taking space out of it, making it back into two-dimensional? And so I mean that I think that's really great. I mean, to add, uh, in a way, to add dark matter is to just be aware of it. In other words, these things, there's a paradox. Like the as we have things become visible, other things start to become more invisible, and that in itself just creates more space to make things more visible. And right, and so there's like a loop. There's like a strange loop happening there, but but I think it's a strange loop that is maybe at the crux of human development across time. Um, right, like the more you know something, the more you know that there's more things not to know. And so and there's something really, I think, in the arts. It's a very exciting energy and space to explore the unknown, to welcome the unknown or play with it, and to realize as you start to know some of these areas, there's just that much more unknown. and and so the any Lana, what was your question again? And then we'll circle back to Chase's idea too.
My question was, as we've progressed in time, it seems like our focus has shifted. I think especially towards like the development of smartphones and everyone can kind of record what they want. It seems almost in a way like we have less dark matter, or I guess that's my question: is do we have less dark matter now that we are, I guess, in a more globalized world and our focus isn't on royalty or nobility, and it's more about um, we're focusing more on people who haven't been focused on before, I would say. So do you think that in light of that, are we having less dark matter, or is it just that as we focus on some things, other things shift to the background?
Hmm. Well, yeah, I think definitely other things. I don't think we can keep in the foreground both individually, like neurologically. I don't think we can keep on the foreground more things than seven. That's why most phone numbers have 7 digits. But and maybe as a society, we kind of have a given amount of things that we can keep in the foreground. Doesn't mean we can't keep them in play. I think we absolutely can. As a society, we can. Our capacity is humongous as a species. It's really unique. However, as much as a strength it is, it's also part of our weakness and what could destroy us. But but with that said, the you know yeah, I think things do kind of could recede as new things start to become visible. I don't think they would recede in a like black hole. I don't think they would recede in a black hole. They would just recede and but still be there like in a library. You can take that book out later. You can compare and contrast that book across new books that are written. We're just increasing our holdings, our capacity. The library is growing, and I think that's such a beautiful thing. So, and if we can harness that and not have it crash down on us, we may be able to do um, you know, like they say, "You ain't seen nothing yet."
Yeah, like to use my metaphor from earlier, instead of taking two photographs looking down the street, we now have 360-degree cameras where we can just take one photograph and get everything from that one point of data. And with this much more wide coverage of data, we can build a more accurate map with less spaces of dark matter in the middle. But that also allows us to get much finer with our detail. We can explore the dark matter in between the pixels almost.
Yeah, uh, I think what is like, you see, I think for me, it's not so much is it possible, it's more how to navigate it with a sense and reality of well-being. So, like to look for possible flags of uh, um interruption. So, like for example, we could probably go quite far in the technological material aspects of looking at art from the past, and also as we invent new ones into the future. And but then it's like, and so that branch of human development can get it's already quite strong, and it could definitely get very strong. And but there's also an interrelationship with other branches of what our species is about and our world. Like for example, emotional development. Like that's one that you would think would be much more um, engaged and developed than where it's at. But where it's at is where it's at. And so I think that's like a cautionary but also inspiring thing, especially for art, because we may not necessarily directly invent the newest technologies. We could indirectly inspire some of the newest technologies. We could indirectly or directly inspire the scientists of tomorrow in the children's books of today, in the cartoons and cinema and art pieces of today that maybe they get inspired by in their field trips and their talks and their consumption of media. Hopefully, there is a lot of powerful, beautiful things there that then makes people interested in pursuing art in the first place, and then they create some of the technology of tomorrow that um, right. So that's one way we work, I think, as artists. and in the arts. Another way where we work is in the immaterial, right? The that we like the metaphysical. And I think there we could even have more of a say. But as soon as I kind of focus there, I I realize there's like difficulty, challenge, and uncertainty of how to not only approach it but develop it and grow it, like the emotional through the arts. Um, but not just for like one art piece or one artist, but for like a movement, for a people, for a society, for a species, for a future. Like, how can we propel that area as well through the arts, through creativity, so that it can support, integrate, and maybe create a wider sense of well-being as we uh, move into the future. Or I guess we don't ever move into it, but as our present, you know, m- keeps going, and the future is the present, and the new future emerges, and as that cycle continues.
I think that's a great place for us to wrap up there. So we're going to go ahead and switch to Q&A. So for those in the audience, if you have any questions, please go ahead and type those into the chat, and we'll get to them as we see them. In the meantime, I'll let you guys go ahead and type your questions if you have any. We do have a few pre-submitted ones. So I guess the first thing that we can kind of talk about is it a bad thing to take inspiration from others, in particular when we're talking about cultural appropriation and things like that? So what's kind of your thought on that, on seeing what others are doing and kind of recreating it in our own way?
That's a great question. I think, hmm, again, you can look at this differently. One way is that there's cultural appropriation happening all the time. There is a melding and a brushing shoulders with, and a learning from, and a listening to the many different kinds of cultures that we have. Um, I think what is something to watch is the frame in which cultural appropriation is framed in. So, for example, uh, is there um, is there appropriate cultural appropriation happening that strips people of the opportunity to have a spotlight shown on them, especially marginalized groups, especially in our kind of region, people of color, people of low income, socioeconomic status, and different kinds of oppressions and marginalizations that we continue to have, is when cultural appropriation happens to one of those groups or communities or people in the arts. I mean, what a missed opportunity! What a shooting ourselves in the foot as a field, as artists, when that happens, because it's kind of like taking you know uh, um, something that's hanging from a branch, a low hanging fruit, and you just take and just run, and you enjoy that moment, right? But you missed an opportunity to really learn from that tree and give it, let people know where you got that fruit from. Let people know that they can learn from them rather than appropriate from them. I think that's a big distinction, right? The other thing that is something to just watch is how cultural appropriation in our kind of context it has been about appropriating from another, from others. Could be from women, could be from different ethnicities and um, racial groups, um, and also countries, and also professions. And so that kind of appropriation, um, something to watch is when it starts to become, um, sort of like bankrupt, Like how does that even make sense or continue when the space in which we are all able to contribute and become a wider, more diverse, like you were saying, Lana, like things shift. And as that happens, those kind of practices that have been damaging, if they continue, they become bankrupt in terms of like, it's out, everyone will notice, and it's out in the open because now the community itself can see themselves in all those different kinds of groups and people who have been appropriated by unjustly. And so there's nowhere to hide that. The looting can happen, but the looting of other cultures and other uh, um, time periods of other and artifacts of other cultures from other time periods, but people will call it out more and more. People will want to do something about it more and more, and so that's part of what I see with that. But you had a second part to your question, I think, or
No, I think you pretty much covered, all the aspects. I do have another question for you. And this one's gonna be a little different. This is more about your personal experience, and it's how have you encountered multiculturalism, either professionally or personally?
uh, well, personally, I've encountered it by that's just how I was born. I come from uh, from San Diego, and my parents are from Mexico, from different parts of Mexico. They're both from Mexico, and Mexico has a lot of people like my parents who come from different groups and ethnicities, indigenous ethnicities of Mesoamerica, indigenous ethnicities that are from the not from Mesoamerica, but from the U.S. Mexico borders, or even from the area that is now the American Southwest, and then also European, Mediterranean, especially Southern and Southwestern European cultures, as well as North African Mediterranean cultures, and especially um, Northwestern, and so that the as well as West African, and other people, and so that's just part of what makes uh, me via my parents and family, but also a country where the more than half the people are of mixed, what in the US you would say mixed race. And in Mexico, it has a different context, that whole reality and discussion. But not just Mexico, it's also that region, Latin America, where more than half of the people are also what in the US you would say is mixed race. And so multiculturalism is just like embedded inside of that. It's, I think, more for me like the different iterations, the different versions, the different layers of multiculturalism. That oh, what is it in the U.S. and it is distinct from Latin America. It is right, and how do people talk about it now compared to the 1990s is also distinct. And so that's, I think, part of what I look at with in terms of me encountering it. I think I've encountered it since I was born.
Awesome. So we are going to wrap up soon. We do have one last question in the chat. And this is a little bit of a two-pointer, I believe. What do you think cancel culture has be- Why do you think cancel culture has become popular? And then, in a sense, taking what could be preserved and learning from instead of opting for dark matter.
A pencil? Yes, I do. 1 second. Those of you in 2025 remember this. Okay, great. Say that one more time. Council.
So why do you think cancel culture has become popular? In a sense, taking what could be preserved and learning from instead of opting for dark matter.
Uh, oh gosh, that's a very loaded. Say it one more time slower. Sorry.
Why do you think cancel culture has become popular?
I don't know. I mean, I think it's become a talking point that maybe people who lean a certain they have a certain political persuasion, and are listening to certain kind of political rhetoric that is out there right now, especially those of you in 2025. Maybe it's worse, maybe it's better in terms of the polarization. I don't know. Only you know, listening in 2025. But the cancel. So I think that's part of cancel culture, and I just think there's so many more things that are more pressing right now, like the social and emotional well-being is so much more important to tackle right now. We're still in a pandemic. We're not at all out of this yet. And also, we when we say we usually are talking about the U.S. and there's only one we, and that's the world, and the world is really not out of it yet. I mean, maybe those listening in 2025 still are seeing parts of the pandemic in parts of the world, still struggling to get out of it. I don't know. Hopefully not. But um, yeah, so that's what I see about cancel culture.
Awesome. So I think that's a great place to wrap up. So thank you, Diego, for joining us again. Just as a reminder for everyone watching, we do have that intro to hieroglyphs on March 16th. And then if you liked what you heard here, please join us for our next podcast on March 25th, where we're going to talk to Brian Kramer and Kate Liska about what their experience is like working in the field in Egypt, and some of the crazy things that can happen. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us, and hope to see you guys in the next one. Bye.
Bye.